European and Atlantic History at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago since 2013. He has held positions in Caribbean and Latin American history at the University of Cologne, Germany, and further 29 positions at the University of Vienna and the University of Graz in Austria. He has held a visiting position at Dresden University in Germany, the Pablo Olivares University in Seville, Spain, the Havana University in Cuba, as well as the Cartagena University in Colombia and the Bolivarian University in Venezuela. His expertise lies in Atlantic, Caribbean, and Latin American history. Professor Christian Cwik.
So, a warm welcome, good morning everybody here. It's Seggau, and I would like to talk today together with my colleague Michael Toussaint, also from the Department of History, because we have to shift perspectives, and me as a Vienna-born Austrian, I have my perspective as a European about the Americas, and I want to invite you to have a tandem conference keynote today, and that's why I wish that Michael, you can come to stage, please, also. Also, I thank all the organizers for this nice invitation here at Seggau. It's not my first visit, so I know the room. I'm not as nervous as my first conference. And also I'm very happy that the moderation of my keynote was made by my student, Ginette Amla-Pascal. She is a student of our department, and as well as I can see other colleagues from the University of the West Indies. We are altogether 9 people here. Mixed lecturers and students, undergraduate and graduate students. So thank you all for coming this long way, crossing the Atlantic. Shifting perspective, Europe and the Americas is a history for Europe beginning in 1492 with the arrival of 3 ships. The Santa Maria, the Nina, and the Pinta. I guess everybody of you know this, the story of Christopher Columbus and the beginning of the modern early period, the end of the Middle Ages, the big changes in the societies of Europe. But, of course, American history started much more earlier as 1492. But if you go to history books, as well as to other books, you will see that the history of America started, in most of the cases, with the arrival of the Europeans. But of course, American history started with the beginning of man's history in the Americas, and this started around 50,000, and started much more earlier, as the history books told you during your school time, because there the history of America started around 25,000. But because of last archaeological research, we know then people came much more earlier as the 25,000. So the whole theory that migration came from Asia to the Americas around 25,000 is now a little bit in problems, because we found bones and so on much more older, as this old story, everybody of us learned this at school here in Europe as well as in the Americas. My keywords of today are the following: normative power, barbarization, noble savage or savage, enslavement, admiration, clash of civilizations, as well as our main issue here, shifting perspective. Normative power, I guess, is for all of us a very important issue, because this is where we as Europeans, and not all of you are Europeans here, but we as Europeans were dominating the definition of the world since around 500 years. This is why Americas came from Amerigo, Vespucci, let's say Italian, because Italy didn't exist at this time, definition. So we use when we say first Americans, we use Americans. It's a European definition, a biographic note after a person, Amerigo Vespucci. As well as we use indigenous people for that, it is a European definition. So it is very difficult to come out of this world of European definition. Throws everything what we use in sciences, which science, every science, from biology to anthropology and theater sciences and so on, is European definition. And it is hard to find other words for something, because it is so powerful that it is very difficult to change this. And this is a symbiosis of experiences of European people, not only on political levels, also on religious level. The Catholic Church, for example, played an important role on this, because the fundament of most of the American cultures today is based on the Bible. And the Bible is finally also a European book, because it is written by people linked to the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, and we are so close here to Flavia, sorry about that, I have to say, is a European culture, more as it is a Middle East culture out of the beginning of the Hebrew religions. Let's start with Christopher Columbus, because I think Christopher Columbus is the main person in this first step to the shifting of the perspective about a world which was not known at this time. Because you know that we have 3 continents in 1492. I mean, we had 4, but we didn't know about it. Europe, Africa, and Asia. And all these 3 are parts of the Bible. By Sem, by Ham, and by Japheth, symbolized by these 3 sons of Noah. So when we began to realize that there is another world, the Americas, we came in troubles, because this continent didn't exist in no book. So the imagination of this world was completely a challenge for everybody. Let's start with Christopher Columbus to understand what is a biography of this time. I mean the time change from the period of the Middle Ages to the modern times. Christopher Columbus was born in 1451 in the port city of Genoa. It is not really clear which family was this Columbus family. There are some experts who are talking about the Columbus family is not really from Genoa, came maybe from Savona, another port city on the Ligurian coast. There are also some speculation about that Christopher Columbus was a Jew, or Christopher Columbus came from the Balkan areas. So Christopher Columbus nowadays is a historical personality with a lot of myth about it. And this is one of these issues of today, myth. If we don't know about things, we start to have an imagination in our brains, and then we think, oh, this was probably like this. Religion, for example, is one of these imaginations. If you don't know, you have to believe. So this is what you see in these first years. Christopher Columbus was born in 1451, as I said, in Genoa, and this is linked to the Mediterranean Sea. So he was a guy from the sea. He went to sea when he was 12 years old, so they say, because we have no real sources about his early years. And then he came to Portugal. And Portugal in the 15th century was the biggest sea power in this area. So Portugal is a sea power because if you have a look to the maps, to the European map, you will see that the geographical position of Portugal is perfect to go north or south or into the Strait of Gibraltar to enter the Mediterranean Sea. So the geographical positions are important to make expansion or for movement. The ship was the key for Europe. The big ships, the modernization, the technology of the 15th century, which is linked to the Renaissance area, which is linked to the new revolution in techniques, you know, Leonardo da Vinci, and all, Galileo Galilei, Giordano Bruno, all this period was important that we can finally cross an ocean like the Atlantic. This was not possible before, and with the exemption of a smaller, short period in China, the Europeans were dominating this ship construction, and if you dominate the ship construction, and you are the master, you will get the masters of the sea. So this is one of the keys for the success of Europe is the ship. So if you are thinking about expansion, you have to think about the ships, because the ships are the tool to come to places far away from your home place, because at this time the radius of movement for a person at the end of the Middle Ages was around 20 to 25 kilometers. So most of you coming to Seggau are need more than 25 kilometers. So if you think about history, or if you think about the period of the 16th century, you have to begin to change your mind completely to come back to the situation of this time, to understand what happened at this time. And at the time, without smartphones, without telephone, without computer, without train, without airplanes, you have to think smaller if you think about these things. So Christopher Columbus was in Portugal, and from Portugal, he made some business trips. This is also very important. Economy. Economy is the main reason for this movement. We can talk now about adventure and so on, that the people want to be an adventurer and so on, but we'll see among them there were real adventurers, but the main people were thinking in economy. Because the problem of technology is, and you need for all this invention money to do this. Without any money, you cannot do nothing. So for that we need at this time metal, gold. But the gold was over in Europe, and the end of the Middle Ages was the end of the so-called Tauern gold, for example, for Austria. So people were searching for other possibilities where they can find gold. And one of the possibilities, where everybody knew at this time, was Africa. Africa was rich in gold since the Romans and other groups of northern Africa have known about this trade routes to the South-Saharan world. So the area of Ghana, which is not the same like the national state of Ghana today, this is a historical Ghana, was famous for their gold. But the routes to come south were hard because you have to cross the Sahara. And it is very difficult to cross the Sahara. So there was a demand to come to the South Saharan region by boat. This is one of the reasons why the Portuguese people were searching for a maritime route to the Portuguese coast to get closer to the gold mines of Africa. To exploit gold, you need mining people. So the majority of mining people in Africa at this point were African slaves, because slavery was the normal form of work. It was not a special thing. Slavery is nothing very special. It was the normal way to work. Slavery as well as Leibeigenschaft in the German-speaking world. This is more or less the same style of work to exploit manpower at this time. So Christopher Columbus was a guy searching for gold at the African coast, and when you are in this business, you do not only want a good, you do more good. So in his repertoire of goods, we find gold and slaves. So Christopher Columbus was a gold trader, and he was also a slave trader. But at the end of the 15th century, the African slave traders were smart enough to increase the price for the slaves. So this was one reason why people started to think about where we can get cheaper slaves. Because the African slave traders are increasing all the time the prices, and we don't want to purchase that expensive slaves. So one of these stories about Asia, about the area of India and China and Southeast Asia, was that there you can find very cheap slaves. So the main reason to go to Asia was to find cheaper manpower. An economic reason, again, but the fundament of Christopher Columbus' idea to take boats to go west, because the east route to Asia was blocked by the Ottoman Empire at least since the fall of Constantinople, Istanbul in 1453. So the way to the west was a way for Christopher Columbus to search for trading possibilities in Asia with people there, and he learned about these possibilities, for example, out of the books of Marco Polo and other people from Europe, because don't forget, Europe is only an Asian peninsula, not a real continent. So the European-Asian exchange was nothing new. It was well done by Alexander the Great, as well as the Romans and so on. We had all the time trading connections to Asia. Nothing was new about it. Also to Africa, what I said, the trading connections were well. So Africa, Europe, and Asia were one world, the old world. So when Christopher Columbus reached the shores of the small islands, we call them today the Bahamas, coming from Spain, Spanish, Bahamar, so shelly water. He saw first people there. People of islanders of, now I start to have problems with definitions of American, at a time when these places were not America, because America Vespucci came after Columbus. So the islands in the Western Atlantic, not the Atlantic islands of the Eastern Atlantic. This would be Great Britain, for example, Shetland Islands, Canary Islands, Madeira, Sao Tome and Principe, Annobon, these islands. These are the Eastern Atlantic islands. And then we have Western Atlantic islands. We call them today the Caribbean islands. We call this today the Caribbean islands because Caribbean islands is also a definition starting around the 19th, 20th century, a very new definition. And you saw these people it reminds him that this people could be people from India, Asians. So the imagination was linked to all the texts, because Christopher Columbus never went to Asia, but he thought that these people are people from India, the Indians. From this time on, this region grew in the Spanish world, because Christopher Columbus was sailing under the flag of the Kingdom of Castile, which later became a part of the Kingdom of Spain, as the Indies, Las Indias. So they founded in Spain, in the city of Seville, the administration for the Indies. After 25 years, they understood that this was not India, but it didn't change. Until today, you will find books about the Indies. And everybody knows that this had nothing to do with India. I mean, we will talk about India because my colleague will give you then the arrival of the real Indians in India, which is not India. But they started also, when the British came 200 years later, and it was Las Indias, and they began to occupy islands there. 200 years later, the British know exactly that this has nothing to do with India. So this is now the West Indies. So it is a problematic definition, because the people who are living there are the Indians, and we as German-speaking people, for example, for us these are the Indianer. When I grow up, like many others here in this world, with Karl May, so I'm so sorry about Peter, please. No. Because he was my winner too. We grew up with the term Indiana. It was normal. So we are using notions where we know exactly these are completely wrong, but we do it again, and this brings us sometimes in real troubles. The next problem of these people, of these Indians, or indigenous people, or first Americans, first native people, are simple. We often use linguistic terms for it. No? We say this were the Arawaks. People are using Arawak as a language, and everybody who is in this bigger linguistic group of the Arawaks is an Arawak. So this would say that every people who are talking French are from France. Also wrong. All the barbaric people from Northern Africa, and they are talking about 120 different languages. And a big group of Barbarian languages are Berbers, but they are not Berbers. So we have also a problem with linguistic terms. And one of these linguistic terms is Arawak for the islands, because we have groups of Arawak speakers. But on the other side, we have also another language group, another language which is Cariña or Kalinagu. And we call these people Caribs. But Carib, and Caribbean came from Carib, is a derivative of cannibal. And this was exactly what the Arawak people, the first people who Columbus met on the islands of the Bahamas, because they were Arawaks, they were at war with the Caribs. So the negative connotation of the others, and this is a new definition I want to enter in this discussion, the others, is that the others are the enemies. The others are the brutal and the cruel people who are man-eaters. And one of the worst things in the world is if you eat men, as men. This was one of the worst things, and I guess it is. And you have this discussion about brutality, unfortunately now in the context of ISIS and the war in Syria and in Iraq, and you see the question of barbarism is a recent discussion, and I think it is important to see this also in this discussion. So the cannibal, the man-eater, was the enemy, and that therefore we have man-eaters as Caribs, and when you go to the Caribbean and you do your holidays there, don't forget that you go in the region of the man-eaters. Yeah, but it is 100% that never ever in the Caribbean nobody found a man-eater. Nobody. Nobody. And we have voyages of pirates, so-called pirates. For example, William Dampier, a voyager of the 17th century, and he surrounded 2 times the world. He was a global voyager. And he wrote in his book, he didn't find one man-eater on this planet. So the man-eater story is also a very important tool for the conquest. Because if people are man-eaters, they have no rights. Because this is the worst thing on earth. So if you find people, they are man-eaters, you can do whatever you want there. Because you have all the rights to do whatever you want to do to occupy this part of the world. So if you like an island and you want to conquer it, say there are man-eaters there, and then you have the right to conquer it. And exactly this was the fundament of the law, of the Spanish laws in the first 2 centuries, to get all these colonies, not only in the Americas, the prolongation of this we will find in Asia as well as in Africa later. To explain the people in Europe that they are man-eaters, they started to draw, to paint these man-eaters and bestias and so on. So we have a rich culture of paintings in the 16th and 17th century. Theodore de Brey from Frankfurt, a very famous painter with Kupferstecher. He, for example, he is famous for his paintings of Caribs. And Theodore de Brey never was in the Americas. So in his brain came an imagination of how should look a man-eater. And go to the internet, search for it, for Theodore de Brey, like Theodore de Brey, B-R-Y, and you will see that the bodies of these man-eaters are European bodies, because you have no knowledge about Amerindian physiognomy. But the most important thing is not how they look like, the most important thing is the activity of man-eating. So this is one of the reasons of this conquest. So the perspective of Europe about the Americas was barbarian man-eaters who try to eat human flesh, and the consequence of this is that we have the right to conquer it. And this is, let's say, this is agreed between the ground, not only the Spanish ground, and the Roman Catholic Church, and later the Anglican Church. So one of these reasons is also that the church had the right for the mission. Because all these people have the possibility to change their attitudes to become civilized. And this is the big confrontation between barbarization and civilization. And you will hear it in the news of today when you open, unfortunately, these horrible moments of our history. Now, the last 5 years are not the best years. With all the wars we have in Libya and Syria and Iraq, you will find all the time this question of barbarization and civilization, which group of the jihad fighters are barbarians, which are half barbarians, and which are civilized, and the civilized are often linked to a catalog of definitions and categorizations in the mind of Immanuel Kant, because what we do here is, again, Europeanization of definitions. We categorize who is a barbarian and who is a civilized individual or a group. So, enemy is a barbar, and an ally is also not always civilized, but he is at least a noble savage. And this is the next concept I want to introduce, and then I give you the stick. The noble savage is the image that this guy is nice and beautiful, but too weak. So we have to help him to come up for more, to civilize him. And this civilization project was also very dangerous, because this opened the door for enslavement. You can enslave people. If you don't kill them, because they're enemies and barbarians, you have the possibility to bring them up, to civilize them via enslavement. So you enslave people a certain time, and after this process, they became civilized. When the United States of America and the abolition of the enslavement in 1862, 1865 was a term like this. Now our black slaves are ready. After 200 years of enslavement, we educated them, and now we give them freedom because they are now ready for it. We, Europeans or their descendants, white Americans or whatever, we are deciding now that these people are ready for freedom, and when they are free, they are not really free. So that's why it took time from 1865 to 1966 that black Americans became free civil rights, because it's the next process. Freedom, yeah, but dangerous, because they could fall back maybe in their barbarian time. So the noble savage is also often a case or a term where people started to study noble savage. We call this often anthropology. Anthropology is where we are going to people and explain, oh look, they are so living, so primitive. That's nice. That's so nice. No, don't use a smartphone or a laptop. You are Indian. You should dance and sing around the fire and praying for rain and so on. Don't watch the meteorology news. It's better to do this. So in the 20th century, started a new kind of approach to noble savage, and this was where we began to do research on the primitivity of people, to see that, look, this is how people are living with the environment and with the nature and so on. Please don't use a car or don't go by plane because you're Indian. It is better you live with your coconut trees and your flowers and so on. Yeah. And this was the birth of what we know today, this ecologic way of life, where you think it is better that you should live like the Amerindians are living in nature and so on. This is also a dangerous approach. We can discuss it, because I think this is a very interesting discussion about it. And now I want to give the stick to Michael, and I hope you will see also the differences of perspectives between me and Michael. Thank you very much for your attention.
If I'm wrong, you will excuse me. Good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Cwik. Thank you very much, Seggau, for what I think must be a rather important forum. I understand this happens every year. This is the first time I'm here. I thank you very much. A large body of students, always interesting. I have some questions to ask you. I learn from students. I'm a student of my students. That's how I carry on, so you will have to help me. In case I never get to say this, I want to invite all of you to the Caribbean, the land of the Caribs, the land of the cannibals. And to my country, Trinidad and Tobago, which is in the Caribbean, which we know now to be the land of the cannibals, and every often I consume a beer or two in the Caribbean, so I consume a cannibalistic beer. Or the West Indies, which, as I told some students in Cologne, is west of where? It's south of Florida, east of Central America, north of South America. So west of where? And that is the issue of perspectives. Perspectives have to be located in a situational context, related to time, related to groups that are interacting with each other. And you have to take perspectives at various levels within the society. The lived experience in shaping perspective, how people live, what they experience, and so on. And perspectives from the point of view of academia. But perspective is always a problem. And I will give you an idea as to what I mean by perspective, and perspective being a problem. And perhaps you will begin to understand something about the European perspective and the perspective of the colonized. Here is this Roman Catholic priest, a group of them, telling this chief in the land of the cannibals how important it is for him to be converted and to be blessed and to do X and Y. You must do this, you must follow this, you must say this, and so on. And when you get these orders, you must do that. And he said, well, why? And he said, well, so you can go to heaven. And he said, what must I do to go to heaven again? When you are told to work, you work. And when the master tells you to do X, you do it, and so on. So why? So that you can go to heaven. He said, this heaven is an interesting place, and isn't that so? He said, yes, so you want to go there. He said, can you tell me something? When I go up there, who would I meet? Of course you will meet us. He said, no, I'm not going. I am not going. You understand? So they have this perspective, and the chief has this perspective, and he's understanding things from a different kind of experience. Okay? And how many people here are students of history? Because the professor talked about anthropology. How many students here are students of history? Can you raise your hands? Good. Students of literature. I thought it would have been overwhelming, but good. And anthropology. Good. And whatever else. Good. Perspective are the result of situations. And they are also shaped significantly by relations of power. And you have domains of perspectives. One of the first and most important is the mythical, regio, mystical domain. The domain that comes out of spirituality. Now every so often, and Dr. Cwik and I work on a lot of things together, I am confused. And when I'm confused, I go to him for clarification. And I go to my students. So you have to clarify for me about perspectives. He talked about Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And we are talking about human slavery. And shaping that perspective is a perspective which you all will probably know. Big flood, and so on and so on and so on. Let me confront you with the banality of it or the strength of it or the weakness of it, you will decide. Europeans, Western man, the Caucasian man is supposed to be my ancestor. I didn't know that. So I'm confused. Because there's a perspective called the curse of Ham. Big flood. Noah and his family alone are saved. And so they retire after being saved. And Noah drinks some special Austrian wine. And he gets drunk. One of his sons get up and see him naked. And go and tell the others, Daddy is drunk. They come backwards. I don't know how they found him. And they covered him up. He wakes up and he said, you saw me naked and you went and told your brothers? I curse you. From here on all your grandchildren shall be black. And they shall serve, I am Ham, or you are Ham, but your children will serve in the shed or the camps of Japhet. Okay? And what's the other one? Sem. Okay? Ham and Japhet. And therefore, that is the reason why I am black. So thank you, Daddy. Okay? Perspectives. That's one kind of perspective. Somewhere along the line, two very, very well-known British scholars or European scholars said, you know, on a Saturday morning at 4004 BC, exactly 10 a.m. in the morning, God completed the earth and the birth of man. We now know that the Amerindians in the land of the Canaanites were living there for thousands upon thousands upon thousands. So that we got it wrong. And the British are especially at getting it right wrong. Okay? Big colonization effort is going on. And the British are the center of empire. So that means British ancestors had to be at the forefront of thought. So 19th century, late 19th century was the age where science is used to prove the differences and account for them. The British planted a man in a place called Sussex. 1913 to 1950, he never existed. He was called Piltdown Man. He had a modern skull and the jaw of an orangutan or orangutan or whatever you call it. And they say that's the British ancestor because of the big brain. That means the British can think a lot. And everybody in the university associated with this remarkable discovery was honored, given honorary doctorates and professorship. 1954, it becomes known as the biggest hoax in archaeology and paleontology and so on. Piltdown Man never existed. But that was supposed to account for the success of the British Empire. And in my world, if you say Germany, you're in trouble. If you say Japan, you're in trouble. Because I have had my full diet of American movies. The Germans always lose. The Japanese are bad. The Japs are coming. I grew up on the word Nam. American soldier in Nam, and a movie called MASH. So perspectives are shaped by power. What do I mean? I spoke of the religious domain. That's this first domain. Then there's utilitarian domain. So what use are you putting this objective? There's always some end towards it, and often it is about exploitation, control, and dominance. Then there is the aesthetic domain. What is beauty? Okay? And what is beautiful and what is ugly? And then there's the erotic domains that have to do with what people call sexual relations and capabilities and so on. And you have a lot of mythical and nonsensical aspects. And if you go down to those people there, they have all kinds of things and they are very sexual and so on and so on and so on. And these people are not. You know? And I ask people, you have to tell me, I used to ask students that you have to tell me why you have so many Chinese and they are coming to Trinidad and coming to the Caribbean and so on. You have to tell me why you have so many huge populations and why European populations so huge. And are these things really real or are they fictive and they are inculcated in the imagination? So, those are the domains, and then you have the academic domain and the lived experience, which is slightly different. But you know, knowledge for knowledge's sake is pure bound. Knowledge is often a packaged commodity, and therefore a lot of what I have told you has passed down to us as facts that are incontrovertibly accurate. Don't question it. And they are in fact nonsensical. Okay? So you have all of these domains of prejudice. What is happening now? As we start to look back, we find that history is going further and further back. And it is having more relevance for the present. I tell students, history is not about the past. It is equally about the present. Because if you understand the curse of Ham, you will understand that the curse of Ham is now a curse against Palestine. Because Israel was founded in 1948. And to form Israel, you had to remove the Palestinians from the land that they were on. The Palestinians will have a problem with the Israelis because the Israelis claimed the land before the Palestinians, or they say they are entitled to it because it was the promised land. So the curse of Ham becomes the curse of Canaan, or the curse of Palestine. And then you understand what ISIS is about. It's far more than a war only of political power. It's a war of religious power. It's a war of geopolitics. It's a war of prejudice on both sides. Prejudice has to do with power. And in a power relation situation, the prejudice of the dominant group or the group that becomes dominant prevail. So a Chinese will look for American eyes, isn't that so? Yeah? African Americanized. And as America becomes significantly important, everyone tries to dress like American. In my country, the sun is hot, and we are in suits. You want to know how bad it is or how good it is? You make your pick. I am in charge of a program, I used to be in charge of a program called the summer program. The principal is sitting there, I have colleagues from UE and so on. And I was part of the coordination of the summer program for the history department. And we're having a meeting, and the meeting is on the business of critical thinking, critical and scientific thinking. And someone is addressing the audience and they're talking about scientific thinking and so on. So when my turn came, I said, Mr. Principal, I'm happy for the summer program. It's a paying concern, and you know that works in my favor. Please bring on the winter program and the autumn program. Fact is, ladies and gentlemen, we have no summer. So how do we get this summer? We have no winter. But I'm old enough to answer it, and believe you me, in my part of the world, after centuries of colonial dominance, we can have winter. And I would have had the program and I would have been paid. Critical thinking and perspectives. That is what you call dominance. And I have raised these issues with you because there are some things we have to rethink. The whole question of globalization. As a modern phenomenon, that cannot be the case when human beings are actually given to movement from one place to the other, and they have been globalizing all the time. Now, there are other questions. Are the Indians in the New World who discovered it before Columbus Indians who are in some related to the Indians of Mongolia? Are Indians Indians? Or are Indians according to the Western pattern of thinking or the Western perspective? Did Christopher Columbus discover the New World as the first case of New World discovery? There was a time when you talked about Vikings, you're in trouble. Now Vikings is the victim. Now we are hearing the Chinese were here before. People are claiming because of the area and the currents it is possible to drift from Africa to the New World. And some Africans, the Africans discover everything. So you have all that kind of thing. Perspectives are a question of situation. So what is the role of scholarship? Scholarship is supposed to veer on the scientific and the more factual. And we are living in what is called a postmodern time, where, as I heard someone said long ago, There are no real poles for the future. We are going to be living in a multiplex world. There's not going to be this American pole and this pole and that pole, and the two poles are fighting and so on, because people are a little more aware that some of the concepts that we hold and we use in our definitions are extremely problematic. The question is, and the challenge for us is, a lot of our history has the result of a lot of power relations, and not necessarily fact. A lot of the writings require re-examination. If therefore I have to use a keyword, I would use the word revision. Each age, each generation, each period must revisit history, revisit the past with the enlightenment that its age has to offer. When I grew up, and I'm not going to stay very long, when I grew up as a young man, I knew of a language that spoke to various races as subhuman. European perspective of the Amerindian was that they were noble savages. Okay? And in the statistics on the islands, they were not referred to as inhabitants. Am I making sense? Europeans were referred to as inhabitants in the statistical data. After the exploitation of the Amerindians and the passing of so many of them, Columbus, or not Columbus, Las Casas, as an act of kindness said, replace them with Africans. I opened the history books, and Columbus is this pious man. He is so pious that when he got lost and he finally saw Trinidad, he named it Trinity, because he saw Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. But Columbus was a big slave trader. Of course he used to pray. And I have no problem with that. What I know is that we now know on board Columbus vessels, as Dr. Schiff was telling the lecture theater recently, there were a lot of people, or enough people, of African descent, because you couldn't fill a Spanish vessel with Spaniards. Significant amount of the people in Spain and Portugal were of African descent because of the wars. If you don't believe me, go and ask Shakespeare about Othello. But they are not reflected in the historiography on Columbus. What I know now is that Columbus was on the African coast, because when he reached Hispaniola, he turned to some of his captains and said, these yams that we are seeing as large as we are the ones we have beheld in Guinea. Alright? A lot of things need revisiting. The thing is, we now have a situation where history has become more scientific. The origin of man is older. We were at one point one world. Plate tectonics shifted us, plants and animals moved here and there. We are still one world. But we have a lot of different perspectives because of the power relations that have emerged. And I can tell you in my country, where East Indians replaced Africans on the plantation, how colonial powers use the shaping of perspective to create what you call division. Divide et impera. Divide and rule. If my Latin is suspect, forgive me. Okay? It's very much like my German, but a little worse. Alright? The Africans faced with slavery was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of oppression. There are a lot of situational aspects. A lot of slaves resisted slavery. It is natural for humans to resist oppression. Slavery was not new. It was a practice act. That was the most recent of the trades that resulted from the transatlantic slave, the transatlantic connections. But you have people enslaved in Islamic territories. Africans were enslaved in Islamic territories. Europeans were enslaved by Berbers and people from the Barbary coast and whatnot. You had slavery in Europe. You had slavery in Rome. You had indentured laborers who were brought back and were treated worse than enslaved persons. Okay? European indentures. The system collapsed. And when the system collapsed, the planter, the British, French, and other planters were in need of labor that was malleable. That is labor that you can control. So the British comes up with the idea of abolishing slavery. But any historian worth his or her salt will tell you abolition was never really freedom. That was a legal requirement because the British was getting so much competition from other groups and other nations that they decided to abolish slavery. Not only that, the rebellions in Haiti meant that the slaves were an uncontrollable land if they were coming from their ancestral continent. So you needed to nurture them, grow them up, treat them nice so that they will go to heaven like that. And all of that collapsed. The British government then turned around and tried to bring people from all kinds of places to provide that labor that they can control. The British planter was special. He didn't need all that labor. He wanted someone to polish his shoe. But not one person, 5 persons. One to lift the foot up. One to put the polish on. One to clean the polish off. One to look at it. One to see if when he looks down and he sees his face, he can raise up. Control. Power. Because that's what he did when he went back to Britain, to demonstrate that although he did not make it in Britain, he was wealthy. Not only that, the British monarchy had a lot of investments in plantations. I have been to some of the palaces here. I have begun to understand something of your history. In Britain, most of the royal households had plantation owners by extension. They couldn't abolish it in its entirety. So they turned to another form of labor. They brought Indians because they thought they were docile and they would not disagree. The Indians they were bringing was some of them part of the 1857 mutiny, looking to get away. The Indians were not really docile. But at any rate, the British government taxed the blacks to pay for the labor. And they continued until 1917 to bring Indian laborers. Until the World War started and it was no longer possible to move with such large volumes. And not only that, it was absolutely no longer essential for this level of labor. Plus that, it was considered dehumanizing to the Indians in India, where incidentally, you have Indians of a fair complexion, Indo-Europeans, and Indians of a dark skin complexion who have been in contact with each other for thousands of years before Columbus even dreamed about getting there. You don't believe me? I tell students, check 2 places on the Andaman Islands and the Nicobar Islands. You want to go and check Tonga, check Australia, the Bruce Port Australia. You realize that people have been moving all over the world. Spain didn't move. Portugal had moved. Italians and others were moving. Islamic groups were moving. So we are now in a postmodern age where we are rethinking all kinds of things. Globalization, discovery, race relations, the commonality of human beings. The objectivity of academic discourse, which could be without objectivity. And if you want the best example of that, try British history. The existence of the monarchy tells you that. So that is how the world is thinking. That's not how I am thinking. I am thinking about how everyone is thinking. I'm confused. I'm sharing it with you so that you will remove my confusion.